If I were to ask you what the most important part of making a good game is, you might say it's making good art or writing clean code, or if you're a real nerd, you might say it's project management or something. But I would argue that many great games have bad art and spaghetti code. I think one of, if not the most important part of making good games is playtesting. As a game developer, it's practically impossible to know if your own game feels fun or balanced. It's like that phrase where you don't want to see how the sausage is made, but imagine you not only made the sausage, but you also made the sausage making machine. You're just way too close to the thing to have any actual objective opinions on it. This is where playtesting comes in. Getting other people to play your game is really the only way to know if it's fun. Admittedly, this is something I failed at multiple times in the past. I have this evil little bone in me that makes me not want to show people unfinished or shitty things I've made. I put off playtesting my game house in hand for that exact reason. I think I felt like I could maybe perfect the game and then send it to playtesters and they would just be like, yeah, you nailed it, it's good. Which is pretty dumb, because when I finally did send it to playtesters, there were so many problems with the game that I didn't even think of. But I'll talk about that a bit later. After the first round of feedback, it was clear that this game was nowhere near ready to release, so I went into Steamworks and pushed the release date back and got to work on fixing all the problems in the game. So far, I've sent 3 different builds of the game to playtesters, so we'll just go in order and talk about the whole saga. By the way, stay tuned because I have an announcement at the end of the video. After hemming and hawing about sending out the build, I finally pushed it up to itch and sent out the email to the people who signed up to playtest the game. Before anyone even played it, I had 2 problems. Both of these problems stem from web builds of Godot projects. I don't know if any other engines have these issues because I'm a Godot pro for life, so I don't care about other engines. But 2 pretty common issues with web builds of Godot games are GPU particles and any sort of async code. My game had both. I used to have particles in the game for when you created a feature to add a little juice, but when I made my very first web build when the game was just a baby prototype, they just caused the game to freeze, so I removed them. However, for mysterious reasons unbeknownst to me, I forgot to turn off the robber particles. You see, robbers are different than other features in my game because they move around. This means they have a different node to represent them, so when I turned off the particles for the regular feature scene, it didn't affect the robbers. I guess I just sort of didn't notice because it doesn't affect the game when I'm testing it locally. Luckily, I remembered right after sending out the email and made a quick hotfix to turn off the particles. Crisis averted. Then I got this email back from one of the playtesters. Uh-oh. Another common issue with Godot web builds comes from async code. The web has a difficult time with this for some arcane and mysterious reason, so the solution is to go into the itch project and turn on the shared buffer array support, whatever it's called. This will magically fix the issue, but it only works reliably in Chrome. I forgot to tell all the playtesters to play in Chrome in my original email, so I sent a quick follow-up email telling them they have to play in Chrome and sorry. So now everyone could presumably play the game without any issues, and I just had to wait for them to respond with their feedback. I won't lie, I was a little nervous. I didn't really know what to expect. It took a few days, but I finally started getting emails with feedback and playtest videos. The main takeaway with this initial round of feedback was that there were a lot of bugs and the tutorial sucked. The second point was a little embarrassing because in one of my previous videos, I bragged about how I had come up with a clever way to make a tutorial where I just made a PowerPoint in Canva. I said this was a great way to make a tutorial as it's quick and easy. Well, I was wrong. Tutorial sucked and no one liked it. This was probably the most consistent piece of feedback that pretty much everyone had. Either they didn't understand it, had trouble reading it, read it and immediately forgot what it said, or just didn't want to read it at all, which I think is totally understandable. It's just a bunch of slides with a massive amount of text on them and that's super boring. One of my friends actually said something along the lines of, I didn't know you could trap robbers, you should put that in the tutorial, when in fact it is in the tutorial. Now, because he's my friend, my first inclination was to call him dumb, but in reality this is completely on me. The tutorial sucked and I can't blame anyone for not wanting to read a wall of text about a game they never played. So I'm sorry if you took my advice and used the Canva PowerPoint tutorial strategy, that was bad advice. Luckily, the playtesters were still able to figure out how to play the game despite the terrible tutorial. There was definitely still an information gap where players wanted more information about things but didn't know how to find it, but I'll come back to that later. The other main takeaway from the first round of feedback was the bugs. I knew there would be some bugs, but clearly I was overly confident because there were a ton of bugs. I have this form people can fill out to give feedback on the game, and one of the questions is, did you beat all 8 levels? And this has an 100% no response rate. Wow, my game must be so hard, you must be thinking. No, it's not that it's hard, it's just that there was a bug where the screen would go black before getting to the last level. So it's completely impossible to beat all 8 levels, which is an absolute buzzkill. The fix for this was actually pretty counterintuitive because players were actually beating the 8th level. However, the level labels were off by 1, so level 2 was called level 1, level 3 was called level 2, and so on. So people beat what they thought was level 7, but it was actually level 8. So that was just a dumb zero indexing fixing thing on my part, and the black screen was because I had last minute implemented a windscreen, but I had forgotten to fade the screen back in after going to the windscreen. This was such a dumb bug and so frustrating to players that I was honestly kind of afraid that playtesters would just quit and not want to test the game anymore, but I was pleasantly surprised. This is something I'll keep coming back to, but the little group of playtesters I've got are amazing. They've been providing such good feedback. I'm actually sort of amazed by the amount they've played the game and the effort they're putting in, so I just want to give them a huge shout out. I did also finally make a Discord for the channel and the playtest and stuff, so if you're interested in joining our little group, the link will be in the description. Aside from fixing a bunch of bugs, I knew I needed to solve the tutorial and information problem, and that leads us to build number 2. So it was clear the tutorial sucked and that I was going to have to make a playable interactive tutorial, but this was going to be a pretty big lift. So my logic was the playtesters already knew how to play the game, so they don't need a fancy tutorial. However, a lot of them talked about wanting more information about things. This led me to one of the bigger new features I added since playtesting, and that is the tooltip and keyword system. Now tooltips are pretty self-explanatory, you just hover over something and it shows you more information about that thing, but the fancy thing that I added was what I call the keyword system. Basically, this is a system that automatically detects certain keywords in a tooltip and then displays an additional tooltip with the definition of that keyword. For example, a keyword in the game is wither, and if I hover over a policy that includes this keyword, an additional tooltip pops up with the definition of wither, which is pretty cool on its own, but that's not all. Now the next bit is probably more interesting to game developers, but I'm pretty proud of it, so I'm including it. I took this opportunity with the keywords and stuff to start implementing a translation system in my game, so now text is being pulled from a translation file rather than being hard-coded. I don't have any actual translations yet, but the scaffolding is there. If we look at the text for the policy I showed earlier, you'll see what looks like a BB code tag called keyword. This is a custom BB code tag I created that tells my tooltip script to check for the translation file for that keyword and then put that into an additional keyword tooltip. Not the flashiest feature, but I'm really proud of it. I'm hoping the addition of this tooltip system will sort of lighten the burden on the tutorial. Obviously, I'm going to create a more interactive tutorial rather than a bunch of text, but hopefully the tooltips will make it so the tutorial doesn't have to be so extensive. One of the most interesting things I noticed from playtesting were all of the problems I never would have thought of. This goes back to not being able to be objective about your own game, but it really shocked me how warped my perception of my game was. There were a lot of things in the game that I thought were intuitive or obvious that just clearly weren't, but there were also playstyles I had never even considered. There was also a bug I knew about before sending the build out, but I just assumed no one would come across it, so I put off fixing it. Obviously, every single player came across it. Pro tip, just assume every player will hit every bug in your game. It's sort of cosmically hilarious, really. It's like that quote, "Man makes plans and God laughs." It's like, game dev thinks his game is bug-free, playtesters laugh. Anyway, there were also just obvious gameplay oversights on my part. One of the biggest oversights had to do with this little reward called card removal. I added this because removing cards in a deck building game is definitely useful, and I didn't really think about it much further than that. However, one of the first things people did was to remove all the cards from their deck. I had no way of handling this because I didn't even think about doing that. Apparently you can also do this in Balatro, but you just instantly lose if you remove all your cards from your deck. I had to look that up because I never thought about doing it in Balatro either. By the way, complete tangent, but I just learned I was pronouncing Balatro wrong. I pronounced it Balatro. I've said this publicly in YouTube videos and not one of you has corrected me. You're all either too polite or you're not my true friends. Just kidding. Anyways, back to the video. So I definitely needed some way to handle if the player removes all the cards from their deck, but there was another problem with being able to remove cards. It kind of became just the meta to remove all the cards except for one feature type from your deck, and you could do this in like 1 or 2 rounds if you got lucky. The way to solve this still isn't clear to me because I think that this should be a viable strategy, it just shouldn't be the only strategy. This is the tricky part of playtesting. Some feedback is super easily fixed, like bugs or certain quality of life features, but some things aren't so simple. Sometimes a playtester has a problem, but there's no clear solution, or the solution causes problems elsewhere. Doing continuous rounds of playtesting is super helpful because you can see if your solutions actually worked, but part of me is torn between just wanting to release the game and move on, or spend more time polishing and playtesting to try to make the game the best it can be. I sometimes get this weird imposter syndrome where I feel like maybe I'm not the right developer for this game, like a different developer could make this game way better than I ever could, but that's probably the case for any game I make, or honestly just anything I do in general. I'll probably never be the best in the world at anything, but that shouldn't stop me from doing the things I want to do, you know? I had no clever segue from my emotional vulnerability to build 3, so here we are, build 3. This is the most recent build as of filming this. The focus of this build has really just been polishing and bug fixing. My kind of internal roadmap has been that this build will be where the game actually works and the jank and bugs won't get in the way of playtesters actually playing the game and having fun. That being said, I did add what I'm calling the QA panel. This is a panel that basically just has a bunch of dev cheats. This was requested by some playtesters so they could try various things out without having to manually make it happen in the game. And I gotta say, I think this is pretty nifty. I feel like in future games, I'm gonna have one of these right from the start. It's super useful and it was pretty easy to make, which felt really satisfying. It's basically just buttons that hook into systems I've already created. It was maybe a couple hours of work, but the result was so worth it. Another focus has been improving a lot of the visuals in the game. A lot of the menus and stuff were just sort of placeholders that were good enough for the time, but now we want to really improve. For example, the shop screen is getting an overhaul because it was honestly looking a little janky. The descriptions of the items and policies would sometimes cause the container to overflow and a scroll bar would pop up, which looked pretty bad. But now we have the tooltip system, so we no longer need these big panels for the items and we can just make the shop look a little neater and more organized. I was just out of town for a little bit, so development has slowed down, but I'm back now, and to be honest, I really need to lock in because there's now a deadline to finishing the demo. Why is there a deadline, you ask? Well, that's my big announcement. The game is actually going to be participating in Steam Next Fest at the end of February, so please go wishlist the game and don't forget to playtest the demo when it's released. I've never done a Next Fest before, so I'm pretty excited. But that's pretty much it for this devlog. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe and all that. Yeah, see you next time.